Okay, brilliant. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Pearson English webinar. It's great to see so many of you here today. A certificate and a recording will be sent to you all after the session. And please do let us know of any questions in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your clip meeting window. Without any further delay, it's my pleasure to hand over to Kasia. Thank you.
Hello, and very nice to meet you all. My name is Kasia Janitz-De, and I will be running this webinar today on catching up on collaboration and communication. And this is what we are going to cover today. To start with, I would like us to look briefly at the effects of school closures have had on students. And then I would like us to focus on ideas for catching up on collaboration and communication, looking at how to work with speaking activities, but focusing also on body language, emotional well-being, and building connections. So that is the plan for today. And I would like us to start by looking briefly at where we are now. We are basically operating in two key scenarios at the moment. Either schools are closed and teaching is happening remotely, or schools are open, but nobody is quite sure for how long. And quite possibly, in many situations, some of the students are at school and others are self-isolating, or they are taking turn appearing at school. So there is this need to address both audiences at the same time. And just to be clear, in this talk, we will be focusing mostly on the situation when schools are open and looking at how we can come up with ideas of addressing issues resulting from earlier closures, and in some cases also sort of look forward to seeing what we could do to make it easier for ourselves teaching when schools are closed in the future, if that happens. So that is the plan for today. And I would like to start with this rather fascinating map, which I found a while ago. This is a map I found on the UNESCO site, which shows the global situation with school opening. The screenshot I am showing here is from last week. And this situation is, of course, changing rather fast. So I already see that not every country is updated relative to the current situation this week. However, the bottom line is pretty much the same, that we have about 33% of learners globally in about 30 countries affected by school closures. I will just explain to you what these colors mean, because I appreciate a lot of us are probably sitting looking at a fairly small laptop screen, so maybe it's not quite clear what it says at the bottom. So the pale blue that you see in Asia fundamentally, mostly, is fully open. The dark blue, which you can see in some areas of Africa, is academic break. The pale purple is closed due to COVID-19, and the darker purple is partially open. So as you can see, it is quite a depressing picture. But if you look back and think back to April of this year, there were over 170 countries affected by school closures. So for many of us, the situation is getting better, and a lot of these children, a lot of the teachers are now back at school after a period of closures. For me, I'm based in the UK, and so for me, this talk is sort of in the early afternoon. I'm imagining that a lot of you are from either Europe or Hispano-America, South America, and just looking at some of you typing where you are from, if I'm correct. I'm just going to go over and see where people are from. A lot of people from Ukraine, Skopje, Ecuador, Poland, Turkey, Croatia, Mexico. It's so lovely to hear this very broad range. Greece and Spain and Italy and Brazil and Tunisia. And wow, that's phenomenal. France, Serbia, Montenegro, Georgia, Iran, Pakistan, quite a broad range. Fantastic. I'm really pleased to see that we have people joining in from such a broad variety of countries, and also that you are so confident using the chat. That is also great to see. Fantastic. Okay. So the effect of school closures is, of course, massive. I have put in here a couple of headlines from UK newspapers. The first one says 4 in 10 pupils have had little contact with teachers during lockdown. So that is a really high number. And the second one says children in England are 3 months behind in their studies after lockdown, with boys and poor pupils worst hit, suggests a survey of teachers by an educational research organization. These come from the UK, as I said, but the situation is quite similar in a lot of countries. Sadly, that for various reasons, whether this is missing equipment or lack of connectivity or struggling parents, a number of children become invisible to the system when schools close. And this estimate of children being behind in their studies after lockdown by 3 months, that basically is most of lockdown. So it does sound like no learning has taken place, or very little learning has taken place in some situations. UNICEF estimates that around 69% of school children have been reached with some kind of education under lockdown. And that estimate does include broadcasting on television and radio, which was organized by some countries. So if you think about that, that is a very low number, really. And I do hope it is a lot better for most of you in your schools. But that is the picture that we have. So let's think how teaching happens when schools are closed. It can happen either by with the use of worksheets and videos that teachers send out, asking students to complete, or with live video conferencing, which can also be recorded, of course. But as you will be aware very well, not all the children can always join live video conferencing, as the internet might not work or parents might not be able to help. I would be very keen to see what your experience of teaching in lockdown was, and I would like you to invite you to do a little poll for us. So very shortly, Charlie will put up a voting screen, and you will be able to click on either when my school is closed, I use worksheets, or when my school is closed, I use video conferencing, or I use both. So please vote. We'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then we'll have a look at results.
Great, those are coming in now, Kasia.
Oh, excellent.
This afternoon's audience are slightly faster responding than the mornings. You might be interested to hear.
People are more awake, obviously, than at 8 in the morning, our time.
So yeah, you should all see the questions with the available options on your screen now. And once you've selected them, please click on Submit, which will be at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so that's just about leveling off now. So I'll share the results, shall I, Kasia?
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
You should be able to see those now yourself, Kasia.
Yes. So just like in the morning, most of you use both. It's interesting, isn't it? It's very good to see that 10% at least can use video conferencing. But if you think about the overall number of students, 10% is not that high. And obviously there are difficulties with using video conferencing with very young learners. Okay, thank you very much. We can go back to the presentation now. And thank you. Yes, and I can see that in the chat you're saying that you use Google Classroom and Google Meets and Zoom. So obviously, yes, a lot of tools are being used. Excellent. So thinking about what skills are most affected when teaching cannot happen face-to-face. In terms of ELT, obviously the biggest issue will be with speaking. And I think even if teaching is organized online and is happening face-to-face, as we all know, it is very difficult to have the kind of level of communication and free exchange of thought as you would in the classroom when you're running a Teams or a Zoom meeting, because you do have to keep the class on mute for most of the time, especially if they are young learners, in order to be able to run the class for quite a lot of the time. And so this, what is missing is not just the ability to practice speaking, but it's also this whole aspect of communication, which is really key, which is that sort of building the sense of connection and belonging with students and with the teacher. So I would really like us to look at both of these aspects together today: the speaking as an ELT skill, but also communication in terms of the sense of connection between people and a sense of belonging in the classroom. And I would like us to start by looking at, by focusing on body language as something that we might want to look at. This lovely photo is showing a picture of a child in China, where some teachers came up with this idea at the beginning of the pandemic of a project where children built their own socially distancing hats. As you can see, they probably had a lot of fun with that project. And wearing this hat, they had no matter how young they were, they had a very good understanding of how far away from their students they need to stand to be, or sit, to be safe. So obviously, distancing helps us stay safe. And it is very important to remember that we need to stay safe. But what is our body language really saying? After years and years of assuming that we basically can interpret people's body language as representing their feelings, we now see friends and neighbors smiling but moving away from us. And we see people crossing the street when they see us and thanking us when we try to avoid them as well. And this is all very contradictory. And for a lot of the children, this reality has now been a very substantial part of their lives because it's been with us for quite a few months. And if children just started school this year, that is the only school reality that they know. So they really might not have enough opportunity to practice engagement with other people, and in particular with their peers. So it seems that this is a very good area to focus on if we are still teaching in school situations. What you can see here is a speaking activity from Now I Know. This comes from Student Book 2, which focuses on engaging with others via body language. So the speaking strategy here is keep your hands away from your face when speaking. And the approach you might want to have to trying this speaking strategy with your students would be to, first of all, try and talk to them about why it might be a good idea to keep your hands away from your face as you're speaking. So because, you know, some of the ideas might be because you can lip read, and so it's easier to understand what people are saying, or maybe you can see their facial expressions better and you can guess how they are feeling. And all of these are very valid responses, of course. And it's then useful, I think, to try this activity as a little experiment. So with children keeping their hands away from their face and not keeping their hands away from their face, and see how they find the experience. Is it any different? You can try this activity with any speaking activity, really. It's just useful to have this focus on body language, and to do it in a sort of explicit way with students, with this little experiment and with a moment for reflection and discussing whether they found it useful and helpful as a strategy. I have added here a few other speaking strategies, which also come from the book. There's many more and more that you can probably come up with. So speaking towards the listener, being open to others by not crossing your arms in front of you. There's some about standing up straight and focusing on the listener and smiling to show interest. And in each of these cases, it might be a good idea to go through this process of sort of discussing why is this a good idea, trying it out, sharing experiences. That's the one suggestion for trying activities with focus on body language. And I think some of them, especially if your school children are wearing face masks at schools, which I know they do, for example, in Italy, might be even more fun to try, because smiling to show interest is more of a challenge if you're wearing a face mask, but obviously very doable. Another area that I would like us to focus on is emotional well-being. While schools are still open, it might be a good idea to just focus generally on how the children feel. They may be going through quite a lot of difficulties within their families, depending on how the situation impacts their parents. They may be finding it difficult not to see their more distant members of their family to whom they are quite close, grandparents. They may be feeling a little bit isolated from their friends as well. So it's a good idea to have a regular conversation with them about how they are, just to keep an eye on them and really just be aware of how they are feeling, and also to focus on helping them express their emotions. And you might want to set up a feelings board, or maybe create some feelings cards with the students that they can draw, or a feelings poster as a class, just so that you have this feelings language available, and that this casual chat about how we're feeling and talking about it openly becomes part of your routine. Another thing which is really key to all young learner classrooms and really helps students feel safe is establishing routines. And obviously this is a good moment to think in particular of introducing new routines, or focusing in particular on routines which you think might be translatable also into online environment, so that when you do have to transition from working at school to working online, you can still follow the same routines, and I'm thinking the order of the lessons or some internal class rules that will be familiar and will continue this context that is familiar to students, even if the system of teaching changes. And of course, it is key for all ELT learners to remember about fun, about movement. I can see that some of you are mentioning here that doing tactile things is very important. Of course, all of this is super important for young learners. TPR is total physical response, so making sure that we learn new vocabulary, new ideas together with movement, quite important for young learners. So all of this is important, and all of this is worth focusing on while you still can, while you're in the classroom situation. And then again, if you do run video lessons, easier to continue doing what you've already started working on. It will all be very clear to the children, and it will help them feel safe in the routines that are established. And another thing that is quite important and quite a challenge, of course, for all of us is making sure all students are able to feel part of the class, especially important in the light of what we were saying earlier about some of the students becoming invisible. And I could see that some of you said in the chat that maybe the 69% of students who are able to continue with the education is maybe an optimistic estimate. There are students who will have missed out when schools were closed. It might be more difficult for them to get back into the rhythm and into contact with their students on return. It's very important to try and bring them together now that they are together, if they are together. It is quite useful to be able to just explicitly focus on the situation at hand. And it does sort of normalize the difficulty of the situation. Oh, my slides started flipping now. I'll try and get back to where we are. This is where we want to be. As we said, obviously we want to have a safe space in the classroom so people can talk about how they feel. But it is quite a good idea just generally to discuss. No matter how little language students have available, we can discuss the situation at hand. And what I'm showing you here is some activities, some ideas that come from the Primary Academy. This is an online resource which you get with any Pearson course for young learners that sits on the Pearson English Academy. And it contains a number of activities and worksheets and ideas related to coronavirus, which could be a starting point for an interesting lesson. And some of the ideas you can see here. One is to just simply discuss the situation in very simple language. So you can always talk about how do you feel this week? When did you wash your hands? How often do you wash your hands? You can see here that there's a little video about how to behave in coronavirus. We also have some signposts that you can put around this classroom or the school about social distancing. So all of this can become useful language and be part of the lesson. On a more positive note, it's a good idea to also focus on some new skills that children may have acquired under lockdown. A lot of the children have learned lots of new things. They may not have been in touch with formal school education as much as we would have liked, but quite often they learned to bake cakes, or with their parents maybe wash a car, paint walls, or load the dishwasher. And these are all very useful skills that are worth talking about proudly, just for children to see that they are learning new things and that there are sort of positives to the whole situation. One idea that might be worth exploring is creating a kind of a time capsule where children can add their photos or drawings or an agenda of what their day looks like or looked like. And they can discuss that among themselves also in the class. Yet another idea that is shown here also from the Primary Academy is running little experiments. And this one relates back to the huge social distancing hat that I showed you in a photo earlier. So if you choose to run this project with your students and encourage them to create such lovely hats, you might then want to ask them how their experience of working at school during the lesson differs when they are wearing such a hat and not wearing such a hat. So it's a kind of an experiment or a game which also touches upon the situation. All of these come from the Primary Academy, as I said, and the idea is that they help us feel more comfortable about the current situation, as well as help us with the language. And there is maybe some new language that you can pick up on there as well. Another group of activities that can be found on Primary Academy is suggestions for mindfulness activities for children, which you can also do with them. One here that I would like to encourage you to do with me is the worry bubble. And I suppose you can do it quite freely because nobody can see you. Everybody can see me, but I would like to encourage you to join me. So I would like to ask you to put your palms together and take a deep breath in. And as you do so, spread your hands further and further apart, as if you're blowing a big bubble between your hands. And then please whisper your worry into the bubble we have just created. And then when you breathe out, you can let go of this bubble and this worry. So this is obviously a little breathing activity, which if you let go of several bubbles, it does actually help you calm down with your breathing, because it encourages you to take deep, slow breaths. Of course, we do need to remember to not breathe in front of other children, so we need to be socially distanced for this to be safe. But there are many other suggestions like this, and if you feel that your class need a little bit more support with dealing with their difficulties, there's some other games and activities that you might want to try. And I would like to add also that there's no doubt, in the light of the learning that has been missed over the last months, that a lot of us are under a lot of pressure to catch up on the missing, on the learning that's been missed, and to catch up with the curriculum, and to even out all the sort of differences that may have appeared within your class in levels. But I do think that it is important to focus also on how the children are feeling in this situation, and to help them as much as we can. And another thing that I would like to focus on now is building connections. And obviously, while schools are closed, interactions with students are a little bit more limited. And some children may have had very little chance, in fact, to build connections with their peers and to focus on other people. So they might need some support in focusing on the feelings of others and learning again how to operate. Sorry, I should be changing to the next slide. And how to operate within a group. I think it is very important, now that schools are open, to arrange as much pair work and group work as it's possible. And also, as I mentioned before, I would like to encourage you to introduce these moments of reflections in the class when you are doing pair work and group work with children. And this can be done even on a very basic level and with quite young learners, to encourage them to think how their pair work activity went, or how their group work activity went, and how else they might be able to improve or change the way their group works. And this kind of explicit conversation and reflection is always very helpful, even if it's a very simple comment. And encourage positive peer feedback. That is also meaningful. If children just say well done, and that also helps build connections. So I would like to focus on another activity which comes from Now I Know. And this is an activity that focuses students on other people. This one in particular is about active learning. So the speaking strategy here is to encourage others to tell you their story by nodding, showing surprise and interest. So very much active listening. And again, I think a useful process to adopt here would be to discuss with students why it's a good idea to listen actively, but also then run this as a little experiment, once with a student telling a story and the other student nodding, showing surprise, and showing encouragement with body language and movement, and also normal language, and once just not doing much at all, and getting students to reflect on how they found this activity, whether they found it helpful, actually, telling the story, to see that somebody else is listening and nodding and really enjoying the story. Again, this can be tried with a lot of different activities. I have put in some other suggestions which come also from the course, and there are other speaking strategies which help students focus on what the other person is feeling. I'll read them to you because I appreciate they're probably quite small on your screen. So one is to try and read other people's body language. Are they feeling happy or uncomfortable? So this can link nicely to the work on body language that we've been talking about earlier. You know, and children can have a lot of fun, I think, trying to show their body language in, you know, saying different things to their fellow students and get the other students to guess and talk about then how they felt. Another idea is to try and find something in common with your friends. So looking for this connection, trying to find similarities. Another one is checking that the listener has understood. So making sure that the conversation is really successful both ways. And you can introduce particular language items here as well, of course, that might be helpful in the conversation for checking that the listener has understood actual grammatical expressions or useful chunks. And the last one I have put in here is thinking about when it's your turn to speak. So again, trying to sort of find this sort of balanced conversation rather than just talking and talking. So there's, of course, many more, and I'm sure you can also come up with many more ideas for how we can focus on others. But I think it just is a very good idea to try and encourage students to find this connection and focus on how we come across, but also how how we can help with the conversation with our fellow students. With a little bit more focus on pair and group work, here's another idea. This comes from Now I Know Speaking and Vocabulary book, of a kind of a structured project to a structured approach to trying to answer a question with other students. So we're going through the process of thinking, what do I think about this issue? What do I think about this problem? Then what do others think? And then, having heard what my friends are saying, have I changed my mind? Or do I now think something else? Or has my answer just broadened? And this can, again, be used at many different levels. So the example we have on this page, which, again, I appreciate you might not see very well if your screen is small, is that the students are talking about extreme weather. And they are encouraged to first of all think all by themselves. What are what examples of dangerous weather phenomenon they know, and then discuss with a friend, and then create a kind of a mind map of extreme conditions once they have discussed this. But even with very young learners with very basic language, you can use this approach for even making a list of food items. I make my own list of food items, I share with a friend, and we have a bigger list of food items. What is quite important here, that we are showing students that there is a lot of value in working with others, and that when we work with others, we end up having more ideas, and that we learn to think differently, and that there's just value in working together. And I think this is worth stressing a lot. And the next idea that I would like to share with you is focusing on projects. And projects obviously are a staple of young learner approach. A lot of students do a lot of projects with every course. This is an example of a project from Now I Know, where we tend to have a choice of projects so that students can do one that reflects their skills. So here we have one that's more focusing on speaking or presenting, and one that's more focused on writing or drawing. What I would like to draw your attention to is that, again, if we are looking at the students presenting their projects, this is a good opportunity of, again, applying in practice all the things that we could have learned about how to talk to others, how to use body language. And again, students can come up with a sort of a full list of things that they have learned earlier. And of course, you're very welcome to help them with those, such as looking straight at the audience, smiling, standing straight, speaking clearly, not fidgeting with your hands, and so on, and applying this as they give presentation. This is useful also when you're using video conferencing for teaching online, of course, as a practice that you can establish now. And another good thing that is worth adding to this is introducing elements of peer feedback. And that, again, can be done with quite young learners, but it is quite important to make sure that the feedback they give is kind and fair. And one way of getting there is that you highlight very clearly what you expect students to do. So it might be worth saying that you are expecting them to meet all the bullets listed here in the project, but also use some particular language that you have learned over the last few weeks, and also perhaps make sure that you stand straight and smile. And then other students will be much more engaged listening to this presentation when they have a checklist that they can tick off. And then you can also encourage them to praise the presenter and say what they have done well. And that helps students, the whole class, to be engaged in the activity, encourages peer interaction, as well as students working together on a project, which we always try and encourage anyway. So that's an idea for using projects. And as we are coming to the end of the session, I would like to summarize what we have discussed. Obviously, communication is a key element of language learning and is also the key skill that may be getting lost when schools are closed. But it is important also to remember that communication that kids need now is broader than a language skill. It is also a way of connecting or reconnecting with other people, rediscovering a sense of belonging and finding balance. And while it may seem that with all the learning that has been lost as a result of the pandemic, we should try and race to catch up on the curriculum and make sure that we even out all the delays. And this is, of course, true. It does need to be done. But I do really think it is worth slowing down a little bit at times and help students find these connections and a sense of belonging, which is also really key in those early years. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Maybe there have already been some questions that I have missed, not being able to follow the chat in great detail.
Fab, Kasia. There have certainly been questions, as always, with your engaging sessions. So if you'd like me to, I will read them out to you. I've got two for you so far. Please, anyone else, if you've got a question, please submit it in the chat box and I'll read it out after these two. So Kasia, the first one is a heartfelt question. There's a bit of an introduction to it. I'm not sure we have the expertise to advise on this, but perhaps, Kasia, you might be able to give a response on it. So young students are hurt when they move in for a hug because they miss their teacher. And now their teacher stops them and won't hug them. They feel more isolated. We also keep telling them not to touch their friends or play with each other when sharing toys. How can we tell them that we love them? We've tried the air hug. It didn't work. Do you have a suggestion? We come from a culture that's very touchy-feely.
I think this is a very important question, and I do wonder if any of you have solutions, because, and if you do, please type them, because I would also say, you know, an air hug or some kind of a, again, try and replace the hug with something else, but really, it's impossible to replace a hug with something else, and you know, all sorts of studies tell us that a person needs like 5 hugs a day in order to be happy. I think most of us are not getting there, but a hug is a hug, and it is a very difficult question.
There's a nice suggestion from Tatiana.
Yeah. So yes, there's lots of lovely ideas coming out. Cut out a heart, a wave. I think agreeing to some kind of a hug replacement, an air hug is as close as can be, and they're all great ideas, but I think it's probably true that it's not going to be as good as a hug. But lots of lovely ideas come in, so I think it's worth trying them all.
Brilliant, thank you. Perhaps highlighting the last one there, that was replace it with a dance.
That's a good one as well, because, you know, moving about does make us feel good as well, doesn't it? So maybe that's a good path to follow.
Perhaps Kasia could coin the Pearson dance. So the next question, not now, don't worry. The next question, could you talk a little bit more about TPR? Perhaps you could define it and then give a few examples of how it's useful.
Yes, it's a fairly well-known approach, and I'm sure you can read up about it a lot more after the session as well. But the basic idea is that children learn a lot through movement, and they like to associate movement with learning. So if we learn new words, for example, it's good to mime these words. It's good to learn new vocabulary in a song to which they can dance. Exactly. A lot of you are already responding. Fantastic. It's basically introducing movement in language learning.
Thank you. So we haven't had any other questions come in. If something comes in now, oh, here we go. How can you logistically reconcile a 6-foot social distancing with pair or group work?
This is difficult, of course, and does require some creativity. One idea that I can think of is for children to do small pieces of a bigger picture. So you can, for example, agree that you're doing a big project which is showing a town, and one child will be responsible for drawing a house, and another one for drawing a park, and another one for drawing a school, perhaps, and then you can try and put them together, and there's a joint piece of work. Another thing could be that you are creating a project together, but on a super large piece of paper, which I appreciate might be difficult to get if the shops are closed. So it is a little bit more challenging, I think, and a lot of it will be sort of doing bits that can create a bigger picture.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Kasia. So we've had no other questions come in, and we're just about on time. So I think we might call it a day there. Kasia, thank you so much for putting together the slides and for the time in presenting.
Thank you very much to all of you for attending the session, and I hope you also look after yourselves as we're going through this.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you all attendees for joining us today. I'm very quickly popping in a link where you can find more sessions as part of this Ready For webinar series. We do hope to see you there. Have a good evening or a good day to you all. Thank you.